I said there, I'll take one book and I'll teach everyone. Then I realized if it's in this book, it's in all those books. That's why we don't have any copies, because it's in the book. So if you have the Sefer at home, Esther, it is Lessons in Sefer Maimorim, and the Maimor is Beyom Ashtei Asar. Lessons in Sefer Maimorim. Okay, Baruch Hashem. So we're going to go to page 200 and no, it's actually 100. The Maimor is also 177. There's a forward as their introduction. The Maimor itself begins on page 184. So this Maimor is a Maimor which was said by the Rebbe. The Rebbe said it in the year Tavshin Lamed Aleph, which is 1971. And it was said in honor of the Rebbe's birthday, just to point out that in general, the Rebbe did not celebrate his birthday. That year, the Rebbe had a Farbrengen, said a Maimer, and it was that year that Rebbe was going into the 70th year. The 70th year was 1972. From that point on, the Rebbe started to Farbrengen more often. And this Maimer became a very known Maimer because it's, number one, it's a very fundamental in Yanim, and also it's a very structured Maimer, how the Rebbe goes into a certain subject and takes us from one layer of depth to the next layer of depth, and we'll learn it as we go along, but this is the references. So take one of these, please, hold it next to you. When we come to a pasuk or anything, and we need to look up the reference to see what's written in the original source, it'll be easier. Thank you. So we can open the first page of the references. The Maim is based on a pasuk in Chumash Bamidbar, Pashas Naseh. So the Rebbe was born Yud Aleph Nisan, and in Nisan there's a custom that every single day of Nisan we recite that part of the Chumash of the Nasi that brought a carbon that day. So as we know that every day, good morning, every day when they, the first 12 days after building the Mishkan, they didn't do the regular Avodah, but each Nasi brought a carbon. And the first day it says was this Nasi, the second day was that Nasi. On the 11th day, which is Yud Aleph Nisan, was carbon Usher. And the Maimer is based on that pasuk. So the pasuk was here, Beyom Ashtei Asar Yom Nasi L'Bnei Asher. On the 11th day, the leader, the Nasi of Asher, his name was Pagil ben Achron, and he brought this and this carbon. Now, if you might remember, Hanukkah time, we pointed out that whatever they brought, every Nasi was exactly, precisely the same, not one iota of a difference. The first day, the second day, the third day, and the Torah repeats all the details 12 times. And what we explained then was that even though technically they all brought the same thing, but spiritually they all brought something different. Because every tribe is a different path. Yes, all the paths are leading to the same destination. All the paths are leading to Hashem and to wherever it needs to lead to in the spiritual realm. But the way to get there is different, a different path. And therefore, the reason is because Yidden have all different kind of strengths and weaknesses and talents and purposes and shlichusim and missions. So therefore, altogether, there are 12 of those paths. And each Nasi is there to lead us in one of those paths. So this Maimon is going to go into what does it say about the tribe of Usher? What was the intention? What were they thinking when they brought the carbon? What is it related to? So we'll start now. And of course, we're reading from the bottom part under the line. The top is just the Hebrew, and the bottom is Hebrew and English. Beyom Ashtei Asar Yom Nasi L'Bnei Asher, on the 11th day of Nisan, the prince, the Nasi of the tribe of Asher, brought an offering. It says in the Medrash, Kol Hashvatim, all the Shvatim, the Shem Gulasan Shal Yisrael, the Shem Shivchan Nikru Shmeisam. The names of every Shevet alludes to, number one, redemption, and it also alludes to the praise of every name, brings out a certain praise about Yid. But it's a different aspect of redemption and a different aspect of the praise. What is Asher? Asher Nikra Shmei L'Shem Gulasan Shal Yisrael. Where is the connection between Asher and the redemption of the Yidden? There's a pasuk. V'ishru eschem kol hagoyim, and all the nations will praise you. Kitiu atam eretz chayfetz omer Hashem tzvois. For you are a land of desire. You're a land that Hashem desires the land. And Hashem, who is the God of all the tzvois, of all the legions, He's the one who said this. So being that, when is this going to happen? Right now, we don't see that the nations of the world are giving us so much honor. But when Mashiach comes, all the nations of the world will recognize who Yidden are and recognize the uniqueness of Yidden. So this pasuk is about Geula. The word Asher alludes to the word Ishru. Where is this pasuk? So again, if you look in the references, it's the second page here in the references. And it's a pasuk in Malachi, which is one of the last Nevi'im, or the last Navi. And here you have it, V'ishru eschem kol hayoyim. All the nations will praise you, for you will be a land of your light, says Hashem, master of legions. Okay. Let's continue. So we're page 185. Hashem Shvachon, it's also alluding to the praise of Yidden. And for this he brings a different pasuk, because this is something which is relevant now, not necessarily when Mashiach comes. Ashrei ha'am shekoch aloi. Fortunate is the nation whose lot is this. Ashrei ha'am she'Hashem elokah. Fortunate is the nation that Hashem is their God. The Medrash goes on to say, Ein ishur she'Yisrael. What is the good fortune of the Yidden? Ella asher bachru b'Kadosh Baruch Hu, because they chose Hashem that He should be their God, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose them that they should be His nation, His cherished nation. So, being that Hashem, we have the good fortune that we chose Hashem, and Hashem chose us. Therefore, we see that the word Ashrei alludes to fortunate, like the word Ashreinu Matev Chalkeinu. How fortunate are we? And then the Medrash continues these words. And therefore, when the time came for the prince of Asher to bring his carbon, what was he thinking? What was his kavanah? He was thinking about the choice that Hashem chose the Yidden from all the nations. Where does it say that Hashem chose us from all the nations? It's another pasuk. Hashem chose you to be His cherished people. So you have this in the Asher Shekachala. You all know the pasuk from Ashrei. Maybe I put it in here. And then we have this pasuk where it says that Hashem chose us. That's a pasuk in Chumash Devarim, where it says you're a holy people, and Hashem chose you that it should be His cherished people, treasured people. Okay. Now come the questions. First, initially, he starts off by saying, what is the good fortune of the Yidden? Because they chose Hashem. The second thing is, and also Hashem chose us. Page 186. When the Medrash adds that Hashem also chose us, that's sort of also an additional thing. But the first thing that he says is the fact that we chose Hashem. And then when he concludes, what does he say? That why is Asher fortunate? Because when they brought their carbon, what were they thinking? Hashem Yisrael. Because Hashem chose us. And this time he doesn't even mention that we chose him. So initially we chose him as the first thing, and Hashem chose us as the secondary. When he concludes, the fact that Hashem chose us is the only thing that he mentioned. So what's the most important one? That we chose Hashem or that Hashem chose us? That's one question. Another question. The word bechira, which means to choose, in its true, pure sense of the word, is only relevant when you choose between two things that are equal. Or in other words, when you say you're choosing, means that in essence both could be acceptable. But why did I take this one? I just chose. It's my choice. But if there's two things, let's say if a person wants to have a house that to accommodate his family, so he needs a house that has 5 bedrooms, and he has 2 houses to choice from, one with 2 bedrooms, one with 5. It's not much of a choice. What I need and what I want is only one of them. But if there are 2 houses with 5, then it's my choice. Or the one with 5 bedrooms has one advantage. It's very closer to where I work or my shul or whatever. And the other one, it's further away. And the other one is smaller, but it's closer to what I need, to my location that I need. So which one do I choose? So again, then it's my choice. But two things that are absolutely equal, but two things which there is one has all the qualities versus the other, it's not a choice. It's as if the choice is made up before you even choose. It's not your choice. And therefore, then again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we're talking about choosing Hashem, what is it between Hashem or, God forbid, idols? Elokei Necha. How can we say that we chose Hashem as if there's two things to choose from? There's only one. Hashem is emes, and everything else is nothing, is worthless. So what's there to choose from? The same applies when it says that Hashem chose us. Page 187. Yidden are much higher than all the nations. Much higher means their source comes from a higher place. So therefore, again, there's an advantage here that's not there. So Masha Kodesh Baruch Hu Yisrael, it's as if, of course, we'll choose that. The neshama Yid is initially closer to the source, which is Hashem, than other neshamas. In Tanya it says, when it says these words, Hashem, you chose us from all the nations and all the tongues. There's a chapter 49 in Tanya where he talks about this concept of free choice. And he asked the question, what does it mean Hashem chooses us from another nation if the neshama to begin with is of a different quality? Now the Rebbe answers, it's referring to the guf. The guf of the Yid and the guf of all the nations are the same, and yet Hashem chose. Because the guf is nidma b'chomer yusel, the guf yumaselim, it appears to resemble the bodies of all the nations. The Rebbe says even that explanation is also not good enough. Why? If you notice, the Rebbe's words are not that the guf is the same. It says it appears to be the same, which means even the guf has in it a certain ruchnistic quality that other guf don't have. So again, if that's the case, then it's not a matter of choice. So the Rebbe says, if that's the case, the fact that the guf of Yidden appear externally to be similar, how doesn't explain Hashem? When you're talking about people who can't see inside, can't see the real depth, they judge by the outside. So on the outside, everything looks the same. But Hashem, He knows the spiritual value of this guf. He knows the spiritual value of that guf. So therefore, again, it's nothing to choose from. The spiritual value that's here is not there. So therefore, Hashem chose Bnei Yisrael. As usual, now the Maimon goes off on a subject, and then later we'll come back to all these questions. Actually, this Maimon, it's a little bit different. In this Maimon, as he goes along, not all the questions, but the whole idea of choosing. That's what the Maimon is about, and he presents a few layers of depth of what does it mean to choose Hashem. At the end, he talks about Hashem choosing us. This is in the reference on page 17. It's a pasuk in Eicha, and it says, Chelki Havaya, God is my portion, so says my soul. My soul says that Hashem is my portion. That sounds similar, that I choose Hashem. This, so the Medrash gives this mashal. Mashal Melech shenichnas lemedina. It was a king that he entered into a country. It wasn't his country, it's a different country. He was coming together with his entourage, and amongst them there were three ministers. One is, I don't know the difference in what the words mean, but in Hebrew it's a very unusual language. In English they say one is dukes, one is prefects, and one is commanders. But whatever the case is, they're all three people that have positions in the kingdom, and they're all ministers of the king. They walk into this new country, and people say like this, one person says, I would choose the duke as my partner. In other words, I want to connect to this one, this minister. The other person said, I want to connect to the other minister. The third person says, I want to connect to the third minister. In other words, each one sees the benefit that they can get from that minister. I guess you can think of it, perhaps, if a person, let's say, is a farmer, and there's a minister who's the minister of agriculture, that's the one they're going to choose because that relates to him. And if he has a different position and he needs benefits in a different area, he'll choose a different minister. So each one chose that minister that's really going to be able to benefit him. There was one clever person amongst them, and he said, I'm going to choose the king himself, not the minister. Why? The Kulam is Chalf, and all the ministers could be replaced. The king could change his mind, and this minister would be fired. We just had a story in the Chumash. There was a king, his name was Parad, and he had two ministers. One was in charge of the drinks, one was in charge of the baking goods, and he fired them, put them into prison. So they were ministers, but one day they were both gone. So ministers could be changed. But Malka, the king himself, that doesn't change. So therefore, it makes more sense. I'll attach myself to the king, not to the minister. What's the mashal? So the Medrash continues. Cain, the same is in the mashal, the nimshal. The word in Hebrew is mashal, is the analogy, and nimshal is what you're comparing it to. We're comparing it to Hashem. The nations of the world is also choose ministers. Some of them, they worship the sun. Some of them worship the moon. I think the third one is that some of them worship the constellations. Abel Yisrael, you didn't say, no, we're not going to choose one of those. We're going to choose HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And that's what it means. Chelki Havaya Omra Nafshi. The Yidden said, Hashem is my portion, not his minister. Not the sun, not the moon, and not the constellations. Turn to page 100. We do a hadig bazeh. No, the questions that are asked in previous Maimar from previous Rabbeim, I think it's mainly Rabbi Maharash and Tzemach Tzedek also talk about this mashal. It says here that there was one person who was very smart, and he said, let's choose the king. Even if someone is not smart, even a little child knows that the king is greater than all the officers. Why do we need wisdom here and cleverness that you should choose the king? But you have to be so smart to make that choice. You have to be, as we call it today, a rocket scientist to know that the king is better than the ministers. That's one question. He gives a reason why he chose the king. What's the reason? because all the other ministers could be replaced, and the king, he's permanent. Even if the other ministers, and even if they wouldn't be replaced, let's say we know they're all permanent, still the king is greater than all the ministers. He's the king. So of course you choose the king out of the ministers. Especially based on what it says, this is the pasuk which is written in reference to Shaul HaMelech. And here in the references, you can see the original pasuk is in Shmuel. That's the book of Tanakh, which talks about the story of Shmuel appointing Shaul as a king, where it's underlined. And it says he had a son named Shaul, who was exceptional. No one in Israel was as handsome as he. From his shoulders and up, he was taller than any of his people. I once learned the mimer, someone told me that in English there's an expression, he's head and shoulders above the rest. It comes from here, head and shoulders above everybody else. So the Gashmis means he was very tall. But what does it mean, Baruchnis? So it's known that Baruchnis it means 191. Shagam, Shichma Shalamelech, also the king's shoulders. What are the shoulders? One shoulder leads to the right hand, the other shoulder leads to the left hand. The right hand and the left hand are the midas of Chesed and Gvura. Midas, which they are products of the intellect, and they're lower than the intellect. In other words, a true king that's chosen is chosen because of his greatness. And if he's chosen because of his greatness, it means that his greatness in intellect and emotion and in midos and in knowledge of Torah, everything is superior to everyone else, and that's why he deserves to be the king. So what we're saying here is that Shaul HaMelech was so great that his midas, which emotion is generally speaking lower than intellect, was so high, the quality was so great, it was higher than the intellect of everybody else. How could that make sense? How could midas, first of all, why is midas higher than intellect or intellect higher than midas? How do you define what's higher when you talk about these things, intellect and emotion? The Gashmis, I know how it is. Take a measure and you measure. If it reaches higher, it's higher. Lower is lower. When you talk about faculties of the soul, like intellect and emotion, how do we define higher and lower?
The source.
The source. Meaning what?
Like where it comes from.
Where it comes from. Okay. That's one way when you talk about it. In the Neshama or other thing you say that comes from a highest spiritual source. But in this case, it's not even about ruchnius in terms of holiness. Even in someone who's not a holy person, if he has intellect and emotion, his intellect is still higher than his emotion. Even if his intellect leads him to doing bad things. I'm not talking about bad and good. I'm just talking about which who's higher, a human or an animal? Doesn't matter. Even if human acts like an animal, but a human being is a higher level of an entity than an animal, and an animal is a higher level of an entity than a plant, and a plant is higher than a inanimate. So what makes intellect higher than emotion? How do you measure it?
I don't quite understand the question, but I feel like you can measure that by like ability or potential, or
That what?
sorry,
That what? The potential of intellect.
to like, I guess, control your emotion.
Do you say because intellect can control emotion, that makes it higher? Or intellect is the source of the emotion, so that makes it higher. But really, these things are all true. It all stems from the fact also that in essence, intellect is higher than emotion. So when you talk about higher and lower, even when you talk about higher and lower, Baruchnius, whatever is less limited is higher. The more limited something is, it's lower. The more defined it is, and the more more limitations it has, it's less quality. Does that make sense or not? It's like we say humans have much greater potential, like you just said, than animals. And animals have much greater potential than plants, and plants have much more greater potential than things that are inanimate in terms of function or whatever they can accomplish with it. So basically, intellect is more, there's more sort of soul energy in intellect than emotion. Emotion, the best proof is animals have emotion, but they don't have intellect. At least not the intellect of a human being. Because intellect is something which is much more abstract. It's something which is much more of an unlimited energy compared to emotion. So how could it be possible that one person's emotion should be higher than another person's intellect? That would mean that because their intellect is on an infinitely higher level, what they feel emotionally is also at a much higher level, and the sort of soul energy that they have in their emotion is greater than what another person has on an intellectual level. I think the analogy to that would maybe be the difference between a person and an animal. Could you say that my emotions are higher than the intellect of an animal? Yeah. Why? Because there's more sort of neshama energy in my emotions than the neshama energy in an animal. An animal's soul energy is of lower quality. So same thing here. The neshama of someone like Shaul HaMelech, like a king, is so much greater that even his emotion is higher than other people's intellect. And that's what he's saying, being that the king is not just because he has a position called king, he's a much greater person. So you don't have to say that because the king does not change, the king is permanent, because the king is just greater than all the ministers. So when we say that in the pasuk, when it says that he's head and shoulders above the rest, and this includes all the people of the nation, even the minister and even the greatest minister. Ministers are also smart people, intelligent people. They help run the country. And yet it says that the king's emotion is higher than everyone else's intellect. That means he is such much greater quality. Or to give you another mashal, could we say that the angels have emotion? It says angels have love for Hashem, fear of Hashem. Could we say that their emotion is higher than our intellect? It's a much greater spiritual quality than even my intellect. They're pure spirituality. My intellect is much more limited than that. So after all that, why is it necessary to give a reason that why does he choose the king? Because the others could be fired and they could be gone. The reason should be because the king is just greater than the rest of the people. So these are the two questions. One, why do you have to be somebody super smart to choose the king? Anyone would understand to choose the king. And number two, if anyone would choose the king, it would be simply because he's the king, not necessarily because he's permanent. Even if everybody was permanent, he's still the king, and he deserves to be chosen more than anyone else. So now he starts the explanation. Page 193. On the surface, you can explain it as follows. That's where the whole mimer goes. On the surface, you can explain it this way. Then the Rebbe writes the explanation is not sufficient. So let's explain it this way. Then the Rebbe writes it's not sufficient. Then we can explain it that way. That's how the mimer goes. That's why I said it's a very structured kind of mimer. It's known is those people that worshipped idols. They literally worshipped idols. They worshipped stars. They worshipped the constellations. Yedua, it's known that the sustenance that flows to the world, and it comes from the stars and the constellation. And according to the Torah, it's true. There's a pasuk. With the goodness of the sun's crops and the goodness of the moon yields. And Rashi and Chumash explains, we have the pasuk here also, The pasuk in Chumash Zeisa Bracha, Rashi says there are certain fruits that are ripened by the moon, like cucumbers and melons and so on. And basically it means that the sun, the moon, the constellations do have influence on this world. So it means Hashem gives his influence through them. But not chas v'shalom, that they themselves are the ones who are responsible for the hashpah. Page 194. And the Shakadosh Baruch Hu mashpi al yodam. Hashem gives the hashpah through them. They're only a conduit through which Hashem gives it. So this is what happened in the beginning. How did it come that people should worship idols? These people thought they thought that Hashem, yes, Hashem is in charge, but these powers, meaning the stars, the moon, the constellations, they give hashpah, which is their choice. The other seven, they didn't know the truth. Shein lehem bechira klal. They're only like an axe in the hands of the chopper. This is a term which is very central in this mimer. Axe with the hands of the chopper means that a person who builds a building takes an axe and chops wood, or uses other tools to build a building. No one is going to compliment the tool, you compliment the person. Why? Because the tool has no free choice as what to do, what not to do. It's the person that has the talent, and the person is one who chooses how to do it, what way to do it. It's all his creativity, is his thinking, it's his talent. Same thing here. The stars and the moon and the constellation, even though we see how there's an effect in this world, but it's not coming from them in their own right. It's Hashem doing it through them. This would be like a person speaking on a microphone, right? You have a speaker up there, and the voice comes out of the speaker. And a little boy is going to think that the box over there is talking. The adult says, no, there's a person speaking. It's just his voice is going through that box. That's how they see it also. They see the hashpah coming from the kechavim, azolas, and they think they're the ones who are responsible. What does it mean responsible? That they have a choice to give or not to give, and therefore they deserve to be worshipped and to be thanked. That's why they bow down to them, and they worship them based on their mistake, that they believe that the sustenance that comes from them is with their choice. So we should really thank them because they're also responsible for what I have. This is another term that's central to this mimer. The wine belongs to the owner, but the waiter deserves a thank you. Which means that when you are eating in a restaurant and a waiter brings you food, you say thank you to the waiter, even though the restaurant does not belong to him, the food does not belong to him, the drinks do not belong to him. Why am I saying thank you to him? And the answer is because he brought it to me. And not only that, he could bring it in a nice way, not in a nice way. He could bring it to me sooner. He can make me wait longer. He could manage to spill some soup on me, and Baruch Hashem, he didn't. So I'm basically saying thank you for his part, whatever he's doing, even though the wine belongs to the owner. Same thing here. Hashem is the boss. These people did not deny Hashem's existence. They knew Hashem is the boss. He created the world. But basically, these are the waiters. They're doing the service for Hashem, bringing things to me. So they deserve a thank you. That's what they thought. One more line. Let's turn to page 196. Gam lefita usam, also based on their mistaken concept that the stars and the constellations have free choice. They thought, if they worship them, then we'll give them more. Not just thank you because it's the right thing to do, but they had more of an intention. By worshiping them, they'll probably give me more, which I show them that I'm subservient to them, they're going to give me more. Had they known that they have absolutely no choice and they have nothing to do with anything, they're just a pipeline that Hashem gives it through them, that wouldn't make any sense not to say thank you and not to worship them. That's the mistake we made. Then the Rebbe goes on to say how there's a bigger mistake which leads to avodah zarah in a more severe way, which we'll soon see. So we'll stop here. So these svarim, we have more in the other room, and the references just stays here now, and the other things will go back to their source in the library room. That's not place and nefesh. It's going to be right there.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. That's love, everybody.
Have a good day.
Thank you.